Hey, it's Dr. Rupi from the Doctor's Kitchen, and yes, I'm doing another Q&A. This is the second Q&A, and my team, my wonderful team, have put together a list of questions from Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, my emails as well, the newsletter, and I'm just going to go through them and randomly pick a few.
I'm sorry, but all questions must be submitted in writing.
So we're going to start at the top here. As someone who is lactose intolerant, is it best to cut out completely dairy, I'm assuming? Cut out dairy completely, even if I can handle small amounts. I'm concerned that there may still be low levels of inflammation occurring in my gut, even if I don't notice it, and over time, would this be harmful? I think it's a really interesting question. First of all, there are lots of people who are lactose intolerant in adulthood. It's a well-established phenomena. Certain people from different ethnicities definitely have more risk of lactose intolerance, namely Asians. One thing I would say is if you're having symptoms, I wouldn't suggest that there is an added benefit of having dairy in your diet that should override your personal issues with the ingredient themselves. So if you are having issues, don't have it in your diet, very simply. You could try different types. You could try fermented dairy like kefir, but ultimately there are so many different sources of highly nutritious ingredients that you don't need to have dairy in your diet if you can't tolerate it. To your point about low levels of inflammation, yes, there isn't much evidence based around how having that low level of inflammation in your gut, even if you can't feel it or you can't notice it, there isn't anything that I can point to that states that you are putting yourself at greater risk. But pragmatically thinking about it, I wouldn't put yourself into that risk anyway. So if you are having symptoms, take it out of your diet, and there are a whole bunch of different dairy alternatives too. I'll try and keep my answers shorter than that. Recommendations for PCOS when weight isn't an issue, as in I'm not overweight or obese, a healthy weight, but best foods for helping balance hormones and symptoms. Thanks. This is a very common issue I find. Women who have a diagnosis of PCOS, that is a combination of insulin resistance, ultrasonographic features of PCOS, as well as irregularity in your menses. It's not all about weight. So even if you're a healthy weight and you have those features, you've still got PCOS, it doesn't mean that we don't give dietary recommendations. The types of foods that we want people to be having in general are high fiber, lots of plants, and mostly plants as well. I've done a whole podcast about this subject with a good friend of mine, Dr. Anita Mitra, who's got tons more on the subject as well, but I would highly recommend you listen to that podcast on PCOS if you have questions as well. We're going to hold up a bunch of different lifestyle features too that will help you with PCOS symptoms. Also, there are a number of different medical therapies that we use as well, so it's always good having a conversation with your general practitioner or gynecologist about it too. When refeeding or gaining weight after weight loss, why does it go into the tummy as far as initially then distributed evenly in muscle? What can be done about this through different types of diet and meal timing? Really good question. I think something like refeeding after a low BMI, whether it be because you're in hospital, whether it because you've been traveling or you've had a gastrointestinal issue where you've lost a lot of weight, it really depends on the person. So you need to personalize your dietary choices based on the reason why you're of low weight. I think it definitely is responsible of me to bring up the issue of eating disorders as well. So if you are of a low weight because of issues like eating disorders, of which there are a whole bunch of different types, it's 100% essential that you do this in conjunction with a registered nutritionist or a dietitian who can guide you. With your point about putting weight on centrally, so it's what we call central fetal obesity rather than other issues, there are two different reasons as to why. One, your genetics. So women in particular are more genetically prone to putting on weight in different parts of their body compared to men, more likely to put it on the femoral gluteal region, so your thighs and your buttocks, rather than centrally. But that isn't to say that some women don't also put it centrally as well. The central type of fat can be bad because it's associated with increased visceral fat, which is basically fat around the organs, which is more metabolically active, and that can have issues with inflammation and putting us at greater risk of things like metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and the other complications of those conditions. The other thing could be the type of foods as well. So if you're having a diet that's high in refined carbohydrates, so that's high in sugars, white rice, white pasta, although they can be good in moderation, so that's quite low amounts, though, in my opinion, that can accelerate weight gain around these certain areas as well. The other big issue is sugar-sweetened beverages, so fruit juices, pop, all the different sort of canned goods that you can find out there in the supermarkets do tend to have whopping amounts of sugar in them, which will increase the likelihood of you putting on weight centrally, which is not where you want it. But if you have other issues, so you've just recovered from a GI disorder, you've been in hospital, you've had intensive care, for example, and you're putting on weight because of that reason, those are things that I would definitely get some personalized advice on, and also combining it with other lifestyle factors too. So it's not a given that if you're under a BMI of 16, for example, you're always going to put it in your centrally. No, that's not the case. You can do other things that will improve your fuel partitioning of food as well. I don't really like to talk about food in terms of fuel, but certainly exercise and other lifestyle factors like sleep can improve the chances of you putting on weight healthily. What is the best diet for emphysema? As someone who is on the upper end of healthy, does a low carb diet really reduce CO2 production? Would intermittent fasting, there's quite a few questions there.
Do you know the McAllisters are going to France? Do you know if it's cold there? Do these vans get good gas mileage?
Gee, kid, I don't know. Hit the road.
Would intermittent fasting trigger stem cell activation and autophagy to heal the lungs? What are the best supplements to include as well? Wow, like 4 questions in one there. Okay. So first of all, emphysema. What is emphysema? It's basically chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. It's an umbrella term that includes emphysema. It's usually associated with those who have smoking, who have been smokers their whole lives, and they have this obstructive pattern of respiration, but it can also be for a number of different issues like genetic reasons as well. Does a low carb diet reduce CO2 production? I'm not aware of that. I haven't come across that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's not true. Intermittent fasting triggering cell activation and autophagy. So those two terms, to just go through the terminology, autophagy is a normal process by which cells essentially are removed. So malfunctioning cells, old cells, damaged cells, it's the process by which they're removed. Cell functioning is or stem cell activation is essentially the production of more stem cells that we find in certain parts of your body, mainly the marrow. Does fasting upregulate that? There is some evidence to suggest that autophagy is upregulated. So the removal of damaged or cells that are just hanging around, they're not really adding much and they could be causing inflammation. Yes, there is some evidence that fasting can do that. The issue is the dose, how much fasting, and the type. What kind of fasting? Is it 5-2? Is it a 3-day water fast? Is it a 16-hour fast? It's a huge discussion, and I'm definitely going to be doing a podcast on this topic with one of the leaders in this field as well, so please do watch out for that. In terms of experimenting with fasting, I don't think it's necessary for everybody, but I do recommend an eating window of around 10 to 11 hours, 12 hours to start with. And in reality, what does that mean? It means having your breakfast at 8 a.m. and then trying to finish your meals by 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. at the latest. What that ultimately does is focus your eating in that window, and it probably reduces your overall energy intake by preventing you snacking last thing at night. So, everyone's had that scenario where they've sat in front of the TV and they just open up a bag of crisps, or they have some sweets, or they have some ice cream. You're going to be contributing to your energy intake when you do that. If you're having a timed eating window, you're less likely to do that. So that might be one of the reasons why fasting, quote unquote, or intermittent fasting, which again is something very different, could be having benefits. But in terms of whether it's it's actually going to cause cell autophagy or upregulate stem cell production, that I think is still something that we haven't seen in human trials. But calorie restriction and calorie restriction mimetics, which are molecules that mimic calorie restriction, are something that I think is going to definitely disrupt gerontology, which is the study of aging. And there's a 3-part podcast series coming up where I interview Sue Armstrong, David Sinclair, and Dan Levitin, who are incredible researchers in this field, and you're going to learn a lot more about aging, particular cell autophagy and senescent cells as well. Does intermittent fasting help with hormonal regulation in women? I'm getting a lot of fasting questions, and I think with good reason, because it's become quite a fashionable thing to do. Does it help with hormonal problems? Potentially. So intermittent fasting in combination with a number of different interventions, including improving the quality of your diet, could be effective at helping with a multitude of different things, because it has been associated with reduced inflammation. Like I said before, there's limited data, there's limited evidence for this, but it's worth trialing, at least doing the eating windows, which I'm a big fan of, 10 to 11 hours. I would say, instead again of using intermittent fasting in isolation, you want to look at the nutrient quality of your diet as to why they might be giving you symptoms as well. And the nutrient quality, I always talk about it: quality fats, lots of color, plenty of fiber, eating in time, and making sure you're enjoying your food as well. It's mostly plants. What do I think of Huel? I've been trying it for lunch at work. Huel is a product, I think, that's got like brown rice, a few other sort of ingredients all blended up and then put into a powder. And I think it's a meal replacement powder. Trying it for lunch because I worry about not getting enough nutrients, but I don't feel any different yet, to be honest. But we shall see. Lol. They put lol. I didn't just say lol, but lol. So Huel, yeah. So meal replacement. I'm not going to talk about a specific brand because I don't think that's really ethical. But meal replacements, do I think they have a use? In all honesty, even though I'm not an advocate for shakes or meal replacements or anything like that, I do think they have a use for people who find it hard to eat on the go, who are traveling for long periods of time where they can't get access to food that suits them. For people who are looking to be stricter with themselves or for a short period of time, yes, I do think it definitely has a role. I also think it has a role in crisis scenarios where you can't adequately get food to people in crisis situations, whether it be flooding, earthquakes, or other humanitarian crises around the world. Do I think it should be part of your weekly regime, or it's a significant contributor to nutrient intake? No, I don't think it's a replacement for food. I don't think a lot of them actually sell it in place of meals. I think it's more of a convenience option, but it does have some utility for people who struggle to get food into them. I'm a food-focused person. I'm a food-first kind of doctor, and also as a food as an adjunct to medications and lifestyle interventions as well. So I'm personally not an advocate for it, but I do see its utility. So it really depends on you. But I doubt it's going to have miraculous impacts on your energy levels or how you feel generally, because they're not really geared up for anything like that. It doesn't contain any active molecules, and other than you not feeling sluggish because you had a croissant instead, as a replacement, it's probably better. How can I leave eating sweets?
I want that sugar sweet.
I'm assuming, how can you stop eating sweets as much? First of all, having sweets isn't such a bad thing. It's when it becomes habitual as part of something you do regularly, that's every day or every other day, that's when it becomes an issue. So how do you stop eating sweets? Well, it really depends on your personality. I would look at the triggers behind where you eat sweets. I would also look at when you eat sweets, how do you feel? And just try and ask yourself those two questions. Is it because of my environment, i.e. there's sweets on the table when I come back from work, or there's sweets at work and everyone digs in? Is that what's triggering me? Or is it something else? Is it a cue like your energy levels? Are you feeling sluggish? Are you feeling fatigued? Or is it something more emotional as well? Is it something that you're doing out of feeling low, or a way of sort of hugging yourself, for want of a better term? Is it an emotional crutch? I think that's when you're going to get down to the basics as to why you're eating sweets. If this is an issue that is habitual, something you do every single day, it should be a treat, it should be a luxury, it shouldn't be a staple. So when you try and figure out what those issues are, you can then retrain yourself to be aware of when you're going to have those sweet items, if it's a habit, and also being a bit more mindful about the amount that you have and when you choose to have them or not. You can also then retrain your taste buds that can be adapted to appreciate the bitter notes in dark chocolate, for example, or bitter dark green leafy vegetables. So it's definitely a process, and people have different ways of tackling their own sort of cravings for sugar and cravings for sweet things. For me, I went cold turkey, and I think that works for a lot of people, but it doesn't work for everyone else. So when I realized I had my own health problems, for example, I cut out a lot of the junk that I wasn't eating, every single day, but I certainly had it in my diet on a weekly basis, and I just cut it out, and that was fine for me. But that's because I had a trigger that was quite emotionally connected, i.e. I had a health problem that I needed to address as well. What is a good diet for someone going through the early menopause and wanting to boost estrogen? Let me tell you one thing. You don't want to eat a certain way to boost something. That's not the way you want to look at food. Food is not a pill. Food is not a supplement. Food is a way of holistically looking after yourself, full of a number of different ingredients and an orchestra of micronutrients and macronutrients that help support your body's innate ability to look after itself. When it comes to early menopause and menopause in itself, we are doing a whole podcast on this. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but I would definitely signal to it in my podcast list. Go to thedoctorskitchen.com/podcast. We're going to do a whole episode on that, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating. We've got a few people coming in as well, so it'll probably be a topic that we approach from multiple different angles too. Another one. Are there any diet remedies recommended for migraines? Yes, there are. A point of reference is the National Migraine Center. I'm doing a podcast with them as well. We're going to be talking about everything to do with headaches, migraines in particular, and looking at good, safe dietary interventions where you experiment with taking away some foods, namely cocoa and caffeine, other stimulants and other things that could be triggering headaches, including a high sugar, high refined carbohydrate diet, and introducing more healthy ingredients as well. Lots more color, lots more fiber, and some interesting anti-inflammatory ingredients too. Not that inflammation is always a cause, but it's certainly related. There are also some supplement recommendations we're going to be making as well. Check out Migraine Center. I think it's called the National Center for Migraine, but we will link to that in the show notes down below as well. There is something else. They do have a podcast too. And again, I will link that down below. Nutrition for and after antibiotic treatment, as well as post-op healing nutrition routines. Really good question. So during and post antibiotics, I always say this to patients. Probiotics as a supplement, either in liquid or tablet form, are generally accepted as safe and potentially, note the word potentially, effective at mitigating against the issues associated with antibiotic use. What are the issues with antibiotic use? It essentially rids your body of microbes and particularly affects your gut, which is the main hub of your microbes. So you want to try and mitigate the issues associated with antibiotics. We use them appropriately. We try to use them appropriately for when there are bacterial infections which warrant the use of them. But sometimes, there are some things that we can do to mitigate that. So probiotics, I would, if I had antibiotic treatment and something that I talk to patients about, I would take the probiotic during and after the antibiotic treatment for at least 30 days. Ideally, you probably want to take it for at least 2 to 3 months, but again, there isn't much evidence guiding us as clinicians about the length of probiotic use during that time period. But it's generally as probably something you want to have as a pragmatic choice. In terms of diet, high fiber as much as possible, because you're trying to give substrate or food to your microbes whilst they're essentially getting attacked by the antibiotic. I know it's not nice to think about food in that respect, but certainly you want to introduce lots of different types of fibers to mitigate the detrimental impact of antibiotics. What does that mean in practice? Legumes, pulses, loads of plant fibers, getting the root vegetables in, particularly the stems of broccoli, parsnips, romanesco, lots of different brassica vegetables, and getting variety of different ingredients as well. The reason why I always say variety is because different microbes thrive on different types of fibers, and so you want to try and get variety in as much as possible, and polyphenols. I'd also, as an adjunct to when you've got antibiotic therapy, sleep hygiene is very important, and making sure that your mindset is one that's quite relaxed as well. So I actually recommend, particularly when people have chest infections, is to not go to work and pop antibiotics. Actually, just take yourself out of the situation if that's possible, rest as much as possible, and allow your body to look after itself with the help of antibiotics too. So that's what I recommend. In terms of, I know the next question is going to be the type of probiotic. I don't have a particular penchant for a type of brand. The more colony forming units, the better, most probably, and the regularity of when you're taking them as well. So you want to try and take them at least once or twice a day. The only ones that I'm aware that may have some evidence behind, Biocult, which is a producer in the UK, and there's Simprove as well. But there are a whole bunch of others. I probably need to do a whole podcast on the types of probiotics out there and how we can actually judge which ones are good or not, because there are lots of claims out there too. What inspires me? Oh, that's a really nice question. What inspires me? I think the experiences I've had with different patients from across the specialties that I've worked in. I'm very privileged to work in general practice and emergency medicine. I see patients from all different types of the scale, both acutely, both chronically. What inspires me to keep going is the disservice I think we do by not introducing food into the conversation around medicine. It's something that I had personal experience of. I had to essentially start from the bottom with regard to educating myself on what I should be doing in terms of my lifestyle and my nutrition. When I had an issue, atrial fibrillation, that may in part have been due to my lifestyle, and it was never addressed. So I think it's democratizing this information, making it accessible to people so people don't have to go through the same experience that I did. Because even as a medic, I still struggled to find out what I should be eating and what my lifestyle should look like. And now I think I'm trying to promote it in a very accessible, easy way that hopefully will benefit you guys watching this too. So I think experiences with patients, my own patient experience, and the feedback as well from this too. It's definitely been an inspirational journey so far, and it's people who I interact with whenever I'm in clinic that definitely convince me to carry on. All right, there's quite a few other questions. We'll try and get to them on another episode of this. As you can tell, my voice is going. I look at the questions as I answer them on camera, so everything's done live. I'll try and put the links down at the bottom, but I hope you enjoy watching this, and we'll try and do this monthly. Cheers. Thank you so much for watching this video. There's so many others for you to enjoy right here. Check out thedoctorskitchen.com, sign up to the newsletter where I give science-based recipes every single week. There's a podcast, there's 2 books, there's loads more content on social media, doctors_kitchen, and I hope to see you there.